And can you tell me a little bit about John Singer's story?
Okay, so John, he came from Germany. He had somehow connected with the Mormon people, came here. Then he started studying my dad's books, all on early Mormonism, and then he got really convinced because it went back to the roots of early Mormonism, and that's when he started saying, "Who is this guy? He just, man, he's nailing everything. I mean, everything in here is just what I think." And so then they quickly became very good friends, and John Singer and my dad knew each other and did different things.
And his story essentially begins in 1931. He was born in New York to a German father and a Mormon mother. And his German father took up the call of Nazi Germany to go over there and join the fight against the Americans, the Russians, the communists. And he went over to live in Dresden, relocating his entire family. His dad joined the SS and refused to let his mother go practice her Mormon faith. Obviously, there weren't many Mormons in Nazi Germany. And the first few years of John Singer's life were spent in Hitler Youth. He doesn't appear to have been a Nazi. In fact, he kind of seems to have not been too fond of his father, and in 1945 his dad and his mom get a divorce. Well, he moves out here to Marion in Summit County because it's called Little Denmark. It's a huge community of Mormon Danish immigrants. Well, over the next couple years, he begins advocating for fundamentalism. He builds his own cabin on a 2.5-acre farm and wants to live off the grid. Singer and his brother, when they were in Germany, they were kids, and they sent him to a Hitler Youth camp. And after a year and a half, apparently they were expelled for refusing to accept Nazism. I've heard John Singer called a Nazi, but he was not a Nazi, was he?
No, he's just stubborn, you know. He felt his rights were, you know, the way they were, and so.
You see, people always have the wrong idea just because somebody mentions this word law that everybody has to bow to it. I do not believe that way at all.
Right or wrong, John Singer was the kind of man whose will could not be broken.
And he marries Vicki Lemon in 1965, and I believe another woman. And when their kids bring home a textbook from public school that has pictures of black people in it, he says, "I object to this. You're teaching my kids, quote, vulgarity, drugs, and sex, and I'm going to withdraw them from public school." Well, homeschooling in the 1970s was a brand new idea, and because he was a conservative activist, he was kind of targeted because they didn't want him representing the typical homeschooling father.
And for John Singer, the problem started when he and his first wife, Vicki, pulled all of their children out of public schools in the late 1970s. The reason for the Singers? Because the textbook showed pictures of black and white people together.
John and I believe that there should be segregation in the races. They're integrating the books. He just objected to the textbook.
At first, the state of Utah agreed to let the Singers do something almost unheard of at the time, homeschool their children. But when John then refused to even let state officials monitor the education, a series of angry court battles erupted, leading to an arrest warrant being issued for John Singer.
Well, he gains a following, and journalists are regularly coming and going from his house in the late 1970s, and one evening, 2 journalists from the LA Times come. They look like journalists from the LA Times, they're driving in a normal car, they're dressed up with credentials from the LA Times, and they, while being greeted in his driveway and invited into his home, they pull a gun on him. And they try to arrest him, but they never identify themselves as police, apparently. So his sons come out of the log cabin and tackle the journalists. They're actually Utah State Police, and John Singer pulls his gun on them. Well, he's found totally not guilty of anything because, of course, the police didn't say that they were police. They had no credentials, they had no warrant, and he was kind of marked for death from this point on.
So there was quite a standoff with, you know, him being forced to send his kids to school, and he had kind of segregated his property off, and I don't even know if he may have put it in a royal title or something, but anyway, they respected his no trespassing and that kind of thing. Well, it got heated more and more, and the news was doing this, and they were threatening, and he was threatening and said, you know, you can't do this, and so anyway, how it ended is that John was one day going out to his mailbox, and that's kind of off of his property because it's on the road. And so the sheriff was there waiting, or one of them in the sheriff department, and he got the mail, and then as he was heading back, he started running, and then they shot him down and killed him
In the back.
in the back. Now, the reason why we know that is because there was a doctor who my dad knew and other men knew, and a patriot went in and wanted to see the body, and they said, you can't see the body, only his physician can see the body. There was a fundamentalist who was his physician. And so he came with the papers and orders and legal documents, and they said, okay, fine. And they went in, and he was shot in the back with double-aught buck. And so that sent bad mojo everywhere of the state and what happened.
We would not make the first move, but I would not let anybody come into my home and take my children away from me without putting up some type of a fight.
How it happened, I can't tell you. Did John say something? Did it make them mad? I don't know. But that was the consensus of what happened to John. And so he was killed. So my dad goes back and he talks to a gentleman named Jerry Spence. Now, you know Jerry Spence. He was the attorney who never lost a case. He had these tassels on. He was from up in Wyoming. He was an old cowboy. He won the Randy Weaver case.
Now, Ruby Ridge is such a complicated case, and the defense attorney who helped the Singer family was also involved with Ruby Ridge. The briefest possible explanation for this case is basically Randy Weaver is a prepper, and he moves his wife and little kid up to the mountaintop right near the border with Idaho and Canada. And eventually, his neighbor has a property dispute with him, so he starts writing the FBI saying this Randy guy is threatening to kill Ronald Reagan, threatening to kill the Pope, threatening to do all this stuff. So because Randy Weaver is such a prepper and living alone up on the mountain, he talks to other preppers in the local area, and unfortunately for Randy Weaver, these other preppers happen to be with the Aryan Nations, who has a compound like 10 miles away from his cabin. So the FBI sees an opportunity. Even though the charges are baseless, they go up to Randy Weaver and they have a friend who's actually an undercover FBI agent say, hey, Randy, can you cut the barrel of this shotgun off? Now, Randy obliges because it's his friend, and Randy's not the brightest bulb in the box. And they basically turn around and say, hey, Randy, either you inform on the Aryan Nations, and you know what Aryan Nations does if you inform on them, they'd probably kill his family, or you go to jail for a very long time. So Randy holed up on the mountain for weeks, and out come the U.S. Marshals. And these guys are unmarked, they don't identify themselves, and while they're on the Y in the trail near his cabin, they see his young son come out with a dog. And all his son sees, because his son has a hunting rifle, he's like 12 years old, he sees these bunch of masked machine gun having camo-clad guys with no markings on them, and the dog starts barking, and these camo-clad guys, they shoot at it. Well, his son raises his gun and says, you killed my dog! They shoot his son, and Randy holes up in the cabin, now convinced that Aryan Nations is out to get him. Well, they identify themselves as FBI, but Lon Haruchi, the sniper for these guys, basically takes a pot shot and kills Randy's wife when she poses no direct or immediate threat. Now, they bring out Bo Greitz, who is a retired Green Beret prepper, and they have him negotiate. Now, Bo Greitz walks up there and he talks to Randy, and Bo Greitz is Randy's hero. Well, Bo Greitz sees that Randy has a root cellar with the body of a young boy, a dog, and his dead wife, and that his friend is already wounded. And this is all after Randy didn't even fire a shot at law enforcement. Now, they covered this up. Randy Weaver actually won the lawsuit and eventually was let out of jail. And Lon Haruchi was acquitted, but this happened a week before 9/11, 2001. So there was no public outcry over Lon Haruchi continuing to work with law enforcement.
He never lost a case. But he said, I'll never ever go in Utah because Utah tends to make their own policies and their own laws, and there's some discrepancies in courts. And the people who've had court cases here say that, and they're like, how did they do that? That didn't even go by the law. How did this happen? And so he said, so I don't want to run my perfect record, so what I'll do is I'll help, because I think this is just not right. And so they helped, and eventually they won the case, not with all the things they wanted, but at least they did kind of win the case over it.